Okay, cool. Right. So today we're going to talk about managing meltdowns and big feelings in your neurodivergent family. And this can be for literally any age. So it can be a toddler having a sort of neurotypical toddler tantrum up to, like, you know, a 25-year-old, 30-year-old, 40-year-old. I think I put a picture up of me having a meltdown in my 20s. They don't necessarily stop. So we're going to talk a little bit about why they happen. But just briefly, if you don't know me, I am Lauren O'Carroll. I'm an award-winning ADHD parent coach, and I take families from the idea of being extra, or maybe too much, to being extraordinary, because I believe that we are extraordinary. We have the potential to be extraordinary, and so do our kids. We just need to believe in ourselves, and we need the world to believe in us too. So we need that scaffolding so that we can live in the way that we need to live. I'm a certified peaceful parent coach with Dr. Laura Markham. I've also studied with Dr. Sharon Celine around ADHD, very in-depth around ADHD, and have done lots of other study around autism, attachment, polyvagal theory, etc., etc. And I have a membership called Growing Extraordinary Humans, which I believe you are all part of, but I'm welcoming people in this week to give it a go as well. So, to start with, the first question I want to ask you is, what is the most challenging meltdown you have faced recently? So just so I can get a sense of what people are struggling with at the moment, feel free to either unmute yourself or share in the chat. And if no one wants to share, I'm happy to come up with one. Anyone brave enough?
We always have meltdowns. I wouldn't say we've had a massive one for a little while. Thank God. I'm sure it's coming because it's the end of term. But yeah, so should I talk about that one? Because that does happen. I just haven't had that.
I mean, any meltdown, like your most recent one then.
Okay. All right. Well, so basically, it was my youngest was doing a dance show. My eldest wasn't dealing. She's the one with the that's on the spectrum. I could tell she was getting a little bit jealous, I suppose. The little one was getting a lot of attention. The dance teacher was fantastic. She even included Olivia to help with taking the little ones on and off. And then at the end, she was amazing. She even gave her like a little gift for being such a good big sister to help and stuff. So the teacher was fantastic. It was great. Everything was going well. And then she wanted a medal that all the dance girls got, even though she wasn't a dancer. And she asked if she could have one. The teacher kindly said, yeah, let me see if I can find one, but then got caught up with the end of the show, everybody saying, fantastic, thank you so much, really busy. And then she wouldn't leave until we got it. But I explained to her that, she's busy, we can't do this now. Maybe the next time we see her, she'll give it to you. And it just went really badly wrong from there. And I didn't deal with it particularly well. My husband didn't deal with it particularly well because we were getting embarrassed. It turned into a point where we had to physically have to lift up our 9-year-old, then she was, off the floor and carry her out screaming and crying, and everyone looking at us like, why is this 9-year-old having this little girl's tantrum? And it was absolutely horrendous. And like I said, it just went from bad to worse because of how we dealt with it. Even when we got home, it turned into having like a little bit of a panic, and we all just needed to have some kind of help after that. So we've learned from it. That's probably why it hasn't been, but we also haven't had that type of thing again recently, like a show.
So let me ask you, what was going through your head when that was happening? Because your reaction, obviously you've recognized, wasn't helpful. It didn't make anything better. Yeah, but it's completely understandable. I think anyone watching this will completely resonate with that kind of experience. What were your sort of thoughts? What was going through your head as she was having that meltdown in that public environment?
I didn't know how to stop it from getting as big as it did. because I couldn't go and just get a medal and give it to her. And then part of me was like, well, you're not entitled to the medal anyway. And I didn't think it was right for me to go and ask for one, as she was so busy, the teacher. So, you know, I had such a mix of emotions, like, you know, recently of my own diagnosis. So I was embarrassed, I was angry, I was scared because I thought I can't deal with this in public. So I didn't know what to do.
And then we kind of get stuck, right? We feel like, you know, people are watching us, we don't know what to do. There's, you know, I kind of just want to get this bloody medal so that we can get out and just stop this, because this is really uncomfortable, but also I don't want to ask for one because it doesn't feel socially appropriate. And, you know, there's all of these things going on, and it's really, really confusing, and our brains just kind of go, whoa, I don't know what to do. And we sort of, we react, we explode, and it's completely understandable. I had a very similar situation myself. It was a bit easier for me because it was with my 6-year-old. Normally it's not, normally it's with my older one. But about party bags, she didn't even go to a party and she wanted a party bag. It was just such an unreasonable request. And it was like, I'm not asking that parent for one. But yeah, it's the same thing. And a lot of that was me and my own insecurities and people-pleasing tendencies. And like, I don't want to ask for one because I feel like it's, and also it wouldn't be appropriate. Like, that isn't necessarily the thing I needed to do. But we're going to go into sort of the meltdown cycle today and look at why they happen. And hopefully that will help you understand what happens. But it's just helpful to reflect, because you'd already reflected on the fact that your reactions didn't help. But I think the other thing we need to remember is that we have to be kind to ourselves. And actually, I think anyone listening to this would be going, yeah, I wouldn't probably react very well to that either, because it's just a high stress situation. And it's helpful to afterwards think about, like, what was going through my head, what really mattered. If we can get ourselves calm, it makes it so much easier. But we almost need to sort of get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And when we're in an environment like a dance show where there's lots of parents who don't know us, don't know our kids' neurodiversity, etc., then it can feel worse because they look normal, and then they're having this spoiled behavior, and there's all these labels that society gives, which make it much harder for us. And especially if we're ADHD too, they may be labels that we feel have been put upon us as well. So there's lots of different things coming into play. Okay. So today, what I'm going to cover is the brain science behind meltdowns, so why they happen, the cost of ignoring big emotions. I'm going to kind of talk about the meltdown cycle and give like a sort of step-by-step as to how I would manage meltdowns based on where you are in them. We'll have a bit of a Q&A. We'll look at kind of what you're going to take away from it. And yeah, that's it really. So what happens in the brain during a meltdown? So in this diagram here, I've got the brain sort of very oversimplified into what we call the triune brain, like kind of 3 different spheres of the brain. So we've got the neocortex at the bottom. That's like our reptilian brain. That's our very kind of primal basic brain that we've had since, you know, we were at the beginning of evolution. I don't know what the term for that is. I was going to say evoluting, but I'm sure it's not that. Anyway, so that's the, sorry, not that bit. The reptilian brain is what is responsible for our survival, our survival functions and our instincts. So that's the bit that was formed first. And it's basically the things that happen in our brain without us thinking about them and without it pulling from other parts of our brain. So it's what makes our heart beat, our lungs breathe. It's also what makes us sort of put our hands out when we're falling. You know, we might be falling and we haven't really processed that we're falling, but we're going to put our hands out and save ourselves. Or if we see a fire, our heart's going to start beating faster and we're going to start to move away from it. That stuff often happens before our brain has clocked into the situation that's happening. So that's our reptilian brain. That's at the very bottom. Then we've got our limbic brain, which is where we store our memory and where all our emotions are. So we might have memories of things which trigger emotions, which can then create reactions. And that also happens pretty quickly. So that bit is thought to have kind of developed in between the neocortex and the reptilian brain. So it's kind of a little bit of a brain advancement. We've had it for quite a long time. We think that animals have that kind of brain as well, or not all animals, but a lot of them. And yeah, basically we're using our memories, they create emotional responses, and that helps shape what we do in response to something. And then at the very top, we've got our neocortex, and that's the bit like the prefrontal cortex is part of that. And that's the bit that is very affected by ADHD, autism. It's where all of our executive functionings live. And it's the part of the brain that helps us with thinking, with planning, with logic. So we already know that that bit is a little bit affected, well, more affected in people with ADHD than not. There's a guy called Dan Siegel. He is a neuroscientist, and he studied a lot about child development and the brain. And he talks about the brain as having like an upstairs and a downstairs. So if you think about those bottom two areas, they would be your downstairs brain. So that stuff is kind of, it happens quickly. It's kind of feels instinctual. We're not thinking about it. We're not having to access our thinking brain to respond to those things. You know, we might have an emotional response and it might make us act in a certain way. We're not necessarily consciously thinking about why that is happening. And then we've got our upstairs brain, which is our kind of logical thinking brain. And that bit often will make sense. We use that to make sense of our behavior or our reactions or our responses or our feelings. So say our child starts acting like Claire was talking about at the dance show. If we had access to that upstairs brain, we might be able to go, okay, I know that when my child is having a meltdown, I need to stay calm so that I can help her calm down. If I get angry, if I get upset, if I start publicly shaming her, that is going to make everything worse for her and the meltdown's going to get worse. So I'm going to stay really calm. I'm going to take some deep breaths. I'm going to say some mantras. I'm going to do all of the things that I learned in that meltdown workshop, and it's all going to be tickety-boo. But of course, often we don't have access to that part of our brain, because what happens is that, so I'll show you in this next slide, the upstairs part of our brain kind of gets cut off. So it's like a trapdoor shuts between the upstairs and the downstairs. And this is a model that Dan Siegel uses to describe how this works to children. And it's a really nice one to share with your kids, but it's also a really good way to just remember for yourself. So if you hold your fist up like that, that is about the size of your brain. So anyone's fist is about the same size as their brain. So it's quite a nice visual for your kids. And down here, you've got your spinal cord, you've got your brainstem, and you've got your reptilian part of your brain here. Then you've got your emotional brain here, and that bit is in your downstairs. And then up here, your fingers, is your prefrontal cortex and your neocortex, so your thinking bit. When we are in a nervous system response, when our amygdala, which is the part of our brain that's down in the bottom and is basically our alarm system. So when we see fire, or we hear something creak behind us, or we're walking down a dark alley and we see a funny shadow, and we have that kind of response of like fear, that's our amygdala triggering fear response in us. And it will put loads of adrenaline through our bodies, and we will go into a fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flop response, right? There's lots of different Fs now that are used, but basically we have this nervous system response. And what happens then is your prefrontal cortex comes offline, and we can call that like flipping our lid. And then this part of the brain has no access to the thinking part. So the brain's kind of disintegrated. The integration has gone. We can't then talk our kids down from a meltdown because they don't have access to this. They don't have access to that thinking part. And sometimes nor do we, right? If we're in our fight flight response, our child can look like the enemy. So in the dance show, it might have felt like your child was the enemy because your child was causing such a difficult situation for you guys. And it was like, we need to shut down this meltdown. We need to shut down this child, because everything in my body and my nervous system is saying, this needs to stop. This isn't safe. And we often get that with kids, if we've got like multiple children and one of them is hurting the other one, we can have that same response. We can feel like the aggressor is the enemy, and we can become quite aggressive to them, or we can talk to them in a way that we wouldn't want to, because our nervous system is saying you're the enemy, even though we don't think it, even though our logical brain doesn't think it. We have these responses. So I guess I'm explaining this both so that you can see from your child's point of view, but also to be compassionate to yourself, that when we lose it, it's often not a conscious choice, and we don't have access to calm ourselves down. So when we're saying to our child, calm down, take some deep breaths, or when someone's saying to us, just chill out or just calm down, it doesn't necessarily help us, because we can't access that language, and we certainly can't access the thought process to understand how to actually use that information. So it's likely, especially in us with ADHD, to trigger rejection sensitivity dysphoria, like we feel like angry and shame as a response to being told to calm down, rather than going, oh yeah, that's a good idea, I'll leave the room and go somewhere else. So often as parents of neurodivergent kids, we have kids with big emotions, and one of the things that I was told a lot was to just ignore the big feelings, or ignore the tantrum, or ignore the whinging, or ignore the shouting. Has anyone else been told that? And does it help when you do it?
No.
So what do you think the cost might be of ignoring the feeling?
They feel unseen, and it just makes them feel worse than they already do.
Yeah, exactly. So it when we have these big feelings, if they're seen, if we feel validated in them, then we can start to process them and move through them. If we have big feelings and they're shut down, we basically just sort of stuff them inside ourselves. So you may experience this day to day. We probably all do to an extent, and certainly can remember it from school days, where you go through your day and someone might say something to you that embarrasses you, or makes you feel ashamed, or makes you feel stupid. And rather than having an emotional response to that and looking silly, or, you know, showing that you're upset by the thing, you might just kind of like push it down and carry on with your day, or laugh it off, but it still hurt. And that feeling is then kind of stored in your body. And that's often why, you know, especially if you're neurodivergent, this happens a lot, especially in school or in the workplace, where we might be misunderstood and we might not be getting the support that we need. And we're trying so hard to fit in and notice what everyone else is doing and kind of copy them and try and do the right thing without quite understanding how that works, and sometimes getting it wrong and getting caught out. We do that for so long, and it takes so much energy from us that we hold a lot of this stuff in our bodies. And that's often why people with ADHD or autism or other kind of neurodivergent conditions might end up with, you know, chronic gut issues, bad IBS, back pain. All of these things are held in our bodies, and all of these kind of chronic conditions are thought to be like caused by this internal stress that we're holding inside ourselves. So we really want to help our kids to process some of those feelings. And actually, kids and adults are really good at trying to process those feelings. And that is the meltdown, or in the toddler, that is the tantrum. So they say that like tantrums are toddlers' way of letting off steam. If you look at a animal, you know, a wild animal who's maybe been hunted or something and escaped afterwards, you know, especially like cats and things like that, they'll shake their whole bodies. And that is them processing that sort of trauma, or what would become trauma, in the body. If that is not processed, then it stays within the body and it's going to bubble up to get felt at another time. So what we want to do when we're sort of talking to our kids about their big emotions, or while we're allowing space for their big emotions to be, we're allowing them to kind of release some of that stuff and making it safe to do so. Does that make sense? Okay. But of course, it's going to happen, right? And that's when we have meltdowns. So this is kind of how I see the meltdown cycle. I should have probably drawn it differently, but I can't figure out how to do it. I'm not very creative. But basically, the beginning of the curve happens super quick. So you'll have the trigger, the escalation, and the meltdown. And sometimes that can be like, you know, a second. Sometimes it can be a bit longer, but we might be able to tease out what the trigger is and see that escalation happening more slowly. It just depends on the child or the adult or the situation. And then that last bit of the curve happens really, really slowly, much slower than we probably realize. So when your child is getting quiet, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are calm and they are ready to reconnect and repair. So I'm going to go through them step by step. So at the trigger phase, the things that can help is, firstly, obviously, to try and become aware of what your triggers are, what your kids' triggers are. So what are the kind of things that might lead to overwhelm and start to kind of trigger that meltdown spiral? So what is activating in their nervous system? What is making that amygdala button be pressed? If we notice a trigger, for instance, if you're at that dance competition and you notice that she's already a bit dysregulated, she already wants to be part of it, the teacher's been amazing and sort of integrated her into it, but you're probably thinking, this is, you know, you're probably a bit on edge because you know that she's not in a great place. You probably can see that it could go wrong or it could go right. You might have just got away with it with the teacher being so amazing, but you know, you don't know. So you're probably also escalated and she's probably going to feel that. So at that first stage, we can look at kind of reassuring and adapting the situation, which sounds like you've done, right? The teacher has really helped with that too. She's adapted to allow your daughter in. To be honest, in that situation, it sounded like she just needed to have a meltdown. It sounded like it was going to happen, for whatever reason. Probably different things happening in her life. Maybe she had sensory needs which were unmet. Maybe she was hungry. Maybe she was tired. Maybe lots had happened the week before. You know, there could be anything. But when we notice a trigger, we can try and just get really calm and close with our kids, try and reassure them and try and help adapt that environment if it's possible. And we can use some grounding techniques. So we can sort of help support them to feel safe, feel grounded, maybe sit them on your lap or hold their hand or stroke their back or something that can just help them feel connected and grounded and calm. So that's kind of like an in the moment type thing. And, you know, it's too late. You know, by the time we notice it, they're already a meltdown. But if you notice it early, you can do those things. And then tips for prevention. So you can try and create predictable routines. That helps our kids know what's coming and it helps us know what's coming. So it takes some of that task paralysis away. It takes some of that sense of overwhelm away. And it just makes things a little bit more predictable, particularly if you've got kids with an autistic profile, but actually also ADHD. We thrive off routines. We just don't necessarily like them. Priming for transition. So transitions tend to be really tricky for people with neurodivergent conditions. So trying to have warnings, use timers, use anything you can to help prepare for a transition and maybe buffer them as well. So maybe having something gentle at the beginning and an end of a transition. So it's not like you're going from one thing to another thing, but maybe there's a kind of, you're giving yourself a bit of a buffer of time so that it can be done in a way that if things go wrong, you're not late. And I'm saying that as somebody who has never actually succeeded in doing that because, of course, I'm time blind and I leave everything to the last minute. So, you know, these are suggestions and you've got to take what works for you and not all of it is going to work. And I'm being completely candid there. I'd love to prime for transitions. Never succeeded yet, but, you know, I'm still going for gold on that. And actually, if you've got people in your home who are good at planning, good at time management, like absolutely lean on them for support with that. But just maybe be talking to them about the fact that it could be quite triggering for you. And so the language that they use might need to be quite thoughtful. And often I work with couples, one of whom is ADHD and one of whom isn't. And we do a lot of work on helping the non-ADHD person in the relationship to understand why certain ways of talking might trigger the ADHD person, and also when to just allow space for them to just process, and they might get angry or whatever. And while that's not great and not okay, sometimes it's just a case of just allowing that and then having that empathy, just like we would with kids. And then, you know, the same goes the other way. It's hard to live with people with ADHD, so we need to kind of give our non-ADHD partners a bit of support and help as well. And so we look at sort of both sides of it. Meeting basic needs first, so hunger, tiredness, sensory comfort, always really, really important. And especially if you've got a child who you know is particularly sensitive to those things, kind of planning for it. You know, I know that one of my kids, when she's hungry, if she's not eaten enough the night before, she wakes up in the morning, her blood glucose is low, like she is not going to cope very well with the day. So, you know, I might clock her in the morning and be like, oh, this isn't going to be a good morning. And I might just immediately go and bring something up for her to eat. Even though in our house, we try not to have food upstairs, like I don't care in that moment. I'm just like, I need to get something into you right now, because I know that in a couple of minutes, you will be a completely different person. But she doesn't know that, because in her state, in that moment, she can't see it. Of course, as soon as she's eaten, she's like, oh yeah, and she can reflect on the fact that she was hungry. And we can also try and track meltdowns to notice patterns. Again, this can be really hard if you're ADHD, so leaning on others, but looking at kind of when the meltdowns are happening and just trying to notice, like, what is the environment, who is around, thinking back and thinking, like, you know, were they hungry, were they tired, what had happened in the sort of run up to that, and just start to see if you can notice any patterns, because you might then start to see, okay, right, these are the probable triggers for these meltdowns. Okay, escalation phase. So this is around kind of when they're going from that trigger to kind of going into the full scale meltdown. So at this point, they're kind of revving up. Their heartbeat is getting faster. They might go into like a bit of a panic mode. They might start swearing or shouting or becoming aggressive. So as a parent watching this, you want to try as much as possible to stay calm and empathic. You want to try and watch your tone and body language. So to almost sort of match theirs, but go slightly less. So if they're really, really angry, you don't want to be talking super quietly, because that's just going to, it's just going to annoy them. So you want to kind of match their energy, but try and do it with a kind tone. And if their body language is all like this, try and kind of get underneath it. So try and get your eyes at their level if you can, or slightly lower. Try and make yourself not feel like a threat, because remember, their amygdala is telling them that they're in an emergency situation. The amygdala can't tell the difference between not getting a medal and a lion jumping out of the bush about to eat them. Like, the amygdala gives exactly the same signals to the body, and so your child is just being flooded with all this stuff. So we need to make ourselves not look like a threat. We need to make ourselves look like a support. So getting physically lower than them can help. Of course, if you've got a child who's very aggressive, you also need to keep yourself safe. And sometimes that might look like sort of turning your body away, so kind of blocking from being hit in the face, for instance. But going with where your child is, and if you can still connect at this level, then to try and get lower and slower and slightly quieter, but not too quiet, can really help. You don't want to say loads, because their prefrontal cortex is kind of like wavering around the kind of, you know, it's like that trapdoor between the upstairs and downstairs is kind of like this. And, you know, use too much language and it's just going to flip right open. So short, simple phrases, you can offer a few options. Would you like a glass of water? Would you like a hug? Or just water, hug, maybe even the would you is too much. So just judging by your child. Does that make sense? Okay. the meltdown phase. So the priority here really is safety for everyone. So you want to make sure that anyone else in the house is safe, that you're safe, and that your child is safe. So you might, if you have a child who has really big, destructive type meltdowns, you might want to identify a place together where they go when they're having a meltdown, so that, you know, when you're at home, obviously you can't do this all the time, but when you're at home, so that they are safe and you know they're safe and that you can support them through it. And that is really important, that that is done together as a kind of supportive mechanism as opposed to a punishment. So I'm not saying, right, you go to your room because you're upset, but it's more like, okay, like after we've had a meltdown and we've kind of, everyone's calmed down, you can reflect with them about, that was really hard for you, wasn't it? And I know you don't like it when you hurt someone or when you hurt something, whatever the situation is that's happened. And I wonder whether we could create somewhere safe for me to help you get to when you get upset, so that you don't then have to deal with that afterwards as well, because it's hard enough having a meltdown. So we're coming from it from a point of like empathy, of support, of like, I have got your back and I know how tricky it is for you and I know you don't want it and I know you flipped your lid and it's not your fault. And I also know that you don't want to hurt people and you don't want to hurt yourself and you don't want to hurt the house. So how can I support you best to create somewhere that is safe? And that is a very different perspective than, you know, go to your room. And it doesn't need to be their room, it could be anywhere. When we're out and about, you might want to have a bit of a plan ahead of time. So like if you're going into a supermarket or into an airport or on an aeroplane or to stay with family, and you know that those times are times when your child is likely to have a meltdown, you can plan together beforehand. What can we do when it gets tricky? What are the things that you're going to find tricky? How can we do some prevention? So like, you know, do we need to bring ear defenders? Do we need to wear sunglasses? Do we need to have, you know, a secret code word or a secret sign that you can share with me to show me when you're starting to get upset, so that I can help take you out of the situation? So just thinking about situations in advance and thinking, how can I support you with this thing? How can we best manage this as a team? And it's all about this idea that you're working together. There's no blame, there's no shame. It's just a nervous system reaction, which they haven't learned yet how to manage. And as they get older and the more you practice, they're going to get better at it and they're going to need less support from you. And they will need to hear that too. They need to hear that they're not broken, that it's not their fault, and that they will learn and that you trust that they will get there. But some people just have bigger feelings than others. Again, we want to use minimal words. We want to try and have a calm tone, but again, like, you know, matching their energy to an extent so that it doesn't feel completely off, like completely disconnected with them. Like if your child's screaming, I hate you, and you're going, it's okay, I'm here with a cuddle. It just feels so different. So you could be like, whoa, you hate me. Oh my gosh, I hear you. Mate, I'm here ready for a cuddle when you need it. I love you so much. So you kind of match the strength of their voice, but your words are different and your meaning is different, and you're kind of creating an opening. But that was actually probably too many words even. You know, it's trying to keep it really, really light. Validate their feelings, but try not to, you know, when kids are very young, we're told to sort of name it to tame it, name the feeling. And actually it's really helpful for us to do that for ourselves. Like if you say, I feel angry right now, to yourself, then you're actually bringing your prefrontal cortex back. You're noticing you're feeling angry and you're able to then start to think through things. But if we say to our child when they're upset, you're angry, I can see you're angry, they may feel really analyzed. It may trigger their rejection sensitivity. It often isn't very helpful. So we use it to help ourselves You know, if you can tell yourself how you're feeling, then that can be really useful. And if we can help kids to learn to identify feelings, that can be really helpful. But I would say in the middle of a meltdown is not the time. So I would be saying, maybe like the word upset could be helpful. So like, oh, I can see you're really upset, because that's not saying you're angry or you're sad or you're cross or whatever. It's a very generic term for like, you're not happy right now, which would probably not feel analytical. But anything else can just feel like you're sort of telling them what they are, and you're analyzing their feelings, which isn't really what we want to do. So we just want to kind of say that it's okay to feel like you're feeling. And we might do that, again, most of the time outside of the meltdown, so that you only need to say 1 or 2 words within the meltdown for them to know that you get it, that you're on their side. And that's pretty much all I would say during a meltdown when my kid's having a meltdown. I might say something like, I'm on your side, or I'm here. And that's it. Because all the other context they understand, because we talk about it a lot outside of the moment. And we talk about it as well when we're looking at other children and other situations. You know, if there's a child in the playground who's having a meltdown, my kids are probably like, what's happened there, Mum? What do you think's going on there? And then we might have a conversation about it. And I might say, well, I wonder if he's having a hard time. Or like when a child is mean to somebody at school, they might come back and be like, oh, this child was really naughty, they did this. And we'll talk about, okay, well, I wonder what was going on for them. I wonder what led up to making them behave in that way. So they can see that it's not just them. They can see that actually all kids do well if they can. And, you know, whenever someone does something that is mean or nasty or aggressive or whatever, there's always a reason behind it. And we want to be empathic, nice, kind people. We want to raise empathic, nice, kind people. So we want to help our kids to start thinking, I wonder why that person was mean. I wonder what's going on for them. I wonder if I can help them, rather than, I'm going to jump on the bandwagon of thinking that this is a mean person. But that all happens obviously at separate times. And so while they're in that meltdown, we're just trying to offer comfort and space and empathy. And if they're having a meltdown because you've set a limit, like, I don't know, you can't go to your friend's house, or you can't have the medal, or you have to tidy your room before you watch TV or something like that, we probably, as much as possible, want to hold that limit, but we can still empathize with the feeling, right? So we can still be like, yeah, I get it, you're angry, you really wanted to go to your friend's house. Yeah, I get it. Like, I hear you. It's tough. I can't let you go to your friend's house right now. Or you're not even saying it, you're just kind of going, yeah, I know, you really want to go. And, you know, they might be pushing and trying to kind of negotiate with you, or trying to, you know, probably wouldn't be negotiating with you in the meltdown stage. That's probably in the escalation phase or the coming down phase. In the meltdown, it's probably just shouting, screaming, thrashing, hitting, that kind of thing. But we don't want to go, okay, right, this is so big that I'm just going to give in now and give you the thing. Occasionally, we might change our mind depending on the situation, but we don't want to teach our kids that, you know, when they have meltdowns, that they get their way. And I often see with my 2 kids, when my youngest has a meltdown, my eldest wants to give in. She will often want to give her the thing because she just wants it to stop. And that's a sign to me that she's not comfortable with big emotions yet. Like, she needs to practice more and more. And it's not surprising because it's hard.
I actually have the opposite. I was nodding and I went, actually, no, my eldest, I feel like in a weird way, she kind of enjoys it, which worries me.
So I guess it probably depends on where she is in her head at that moment. So my eldest, I'm fairly sure, well, she's got sensory processing disorder. So she feels massively overwhelmed by the sounds and the emotional intensity in the room. So she would start by probably being quite pleased that her sister is the one who's a problem. But as we go on, it might become too much. So recently, and I think this is because of the end of the school term and it being hot and stuff, my youngest has been having these massive screaming fits in the car. And it's like this small closed environment, and she's just like, whatever it takes, I need to shut this down. So it starts with hitting, and then it's like, okay, now I'll just give you whatever you want, just shut up, you know. So it depends on the context, but yeah, absolutely, there may be that sense of like, I'm enjoying this because it's them, not me. Especially if your eldest is someone who often does attract a lot of negative attention, does have a lot of big feelings, does have a lot of meltdowns. It can feel really nice.
Being the eldest is already hard for her because obviously the 5-year-old's at that cute stage, right? Where it's like kind of, you know, so, and I'm very aware, I'm very careful of how much attention anyway I give the 5-year-old. I try and make sure I always then have something for the 10-year-old, but like, yeah, but I just feel like she kind of then wants to get like a quids in, so to speak, of if Darcy's having a meltdown, because like I said, I'm pretty sure she's on the spectrum as well. She's more like 0 to 0, like 0 to 0. That makes sense. 0 to 0 really quickly. And but then I feel like I said, my eldest is kind of like then wants to get in with what I'm trying to tell her. Like I'm not shouting at her, but I'm, you know, at the beginning saying like, this is, you know, this is not acceptable. This, you can't behave like this. And then yeah, she kind of then gets her moment. I'm like, no, you know, I'm dealing with this. And then but yeah, and I'm just like, oh, I don't know how to deal with this, because then she gets to hump with me because I'm saying, Olivia, this is not to do with you. Yeah, so I mean, I feel like she kind of is a bit, I don't know how to deal with that, but it's a separate thing.
Anyone else resonate with this? I do massively. We have it all the time. I think it's worth having a conversation. Well, it will be multiple conversations outside the time, and just be like, I really appreciate that you're trying to help and you're being so grown up and you can see exactly what's happening. But actually, when your sister's having a meltdown, it's my job as mum to manage that. And I don't want you to get involved. I don't want it to interfere with your relationship with your sister. I know you're trying to help, but I need to be able to do that on my own, because for your sister, and you can again show her the hand model, your sister's flipped her lid. She can't deal with too much talking. So we can't have 2 people talking. It's got to be one person. And I will say the same to you, to your sister, when you're having a meltdown, because can you imagine when you're upset and your sister and me are both telling you what to do? That feels really horrible, doesn't it? So we need to try and to make it just as few people and as few words as possible. And, you know, you can explain, I mean, she's 9, you can explain quite a lot of the neuroscience to her so that she understands why. And yes, she'll probably still try and do it. It makes her feel grown up. It makes her feel like, look, mum, I'm not having a meltdown and I want you to see that I'm not. So you can try and like thank her in the moment for stepping back, you know, oh, well done. I really appreciate that you're staying back there after our chat. Like, that's so helpful to me. Or give her little jobs. Would you be able to go and get some water? Because when she's feeling a bit better, she's going to really need a sip of cold water. Something like that. So like giving her things so she can feel responsible, she can feel helpful, she can show off to you how unmeltdownish she is in the moment, but she's not getting involved. And, you know, she will probably be in that escalation mode herself when this is happening. So it might not always work. And sometimes we just have to sort of, you know, disaster manage and just kind of try and, but you can sort of try and provide that support in and around the situation. And again, most of these conversations are happening during the meltdown arc. As they come to de-escalate, we want to allow space for decompressions. We want to allow them space and time to just kind of come down. We want to remain nearby and available. And often in gentle parenting books, you'll hear like, never leave your child alone with their feelings, like stay with them, offer them hugs. And trust me, I spent years trying to do that. And it took me a really long time to actually put all that stuff aside in my brain and go, oh, let me listen to my daughter who's screaming at me to get out the room. And I checked with her after she had a meltdown once, and I said, you know, when you shout for me to get out the room, do you actually want me to get out the room? Or because I don't want to leave you alone with these big feelings. And she's like, no, I want you to get out the room, Mummy. I need some space. And I was like, okay, right. I don't know why it's taken me 3 years to come to the realization that I should be listening to my daughter and what she's telling me. But it did, because there was so much pressure to stay with her and not leave her alone. So, you know, I would try and listen to your child, but also check in. So I do things sometimes like, you know, if they're saying get out, I would say something like, I just want to check you really want me to get out. Or actually, I probably wouldn't even say that at this stage. I'd probably just say, can you just put your hand on your head if you really want me to get out? So it's like them having to do another thing. So that, because they might be shouting, get out, because they're cross with you, but they don't actually want you to go. So that next stage of putting their hand on their head probably won't happen. And then you know, okay, maybe I just take a step back. So you can try and sort of give them the bit of space, because what they're probably trying to do is manage their feelings, their shame. You know, they're trying to temper all of that horrible feeling that as you get closer and kinder and more empathic to them, that's going to make all those feelings inside them feel worse, feel more likely to come out. We don't want to feel shame. It really hurts. So we do anything to push it down. So that might be why we're shouting for people to get out, to leave us alone. You can offer cues for regulation. So I mentioned earlier about kind of getting a cold drink and like sipping it through a straw. Having a little anchor like that can be really, really helpful when your child has frequent meltdowns. So finding something that helps to soothe them. So drinking through a straw can be great, and actually sort of changing body temperature is great. So that's why I really like drinking a cold drink. You could try and hold them if they'll let you and rock with them. You can breathe together. You could maybe swing them, stroke them, do something creative, you know, offer some pens and colouring. I mean, I've often sat down and just done an activity myself in a place where it's quite clear that I've got an open invitation. So I might get a colouring book out and some pens and sort of leave a space next to me that's quite obviously needing to be filled by my child who's dysregulated. And they might quietly come and colour with me for a moment. And, you know, I don't go straight into talking. You really don't want to rush it. The de-escalation phase can take minimum of 20 minutes, probably more like 40 minutes to hours, or even days, depending on how big the thing is and how big the feelings are and how much is underneath that. Because remember, the meltdown isn't about the trigger necessarily. It's probably about loads of stuff that's come up before it as well. So we don't want to rush them into taking responsibility, into coaching them through the meltdown. We really want them to have time for all of that cortisol, all of that adrenaline, all of the other stuff that's just rushing through their body to just start to settle, and then to feel calmer and more present and more able to connect with you. When you feel like they're there, and that might be, I mean, I would often sort of wait until bedtime for this, because, you know, normally enough time has passed by then and it's a quiet time when I can reconnect with my child. But, you know, if it's happened in the morning and it's a weekend, it might be a few hours later. I'd find them somewhere and try and have a quiet chat. But you kind of want it to be one-on-one. And the first thing you want to do is reconnect with them. So you want to, again, empathize about what happened. It was really tough earlier, wasn't it? I could see how much you were trying, how hard you struggled, whatever it is, whatever they will accept. And then you can try and talk to them about repair. So you didn't like it when you did X, Y, Z. I know that you wouldn't do that if you hadn't flipped your lid. And I know the reason that you did that was because you weren't able to access that beautiful, kind part of your brain at that moment, and you were stuck in fight or flight. So I wonder what you could do to put things right, because we always, you can have a saying that you always say in your house, so like, we always take care of our mistakes, or we always put things right after we've got something wrong, or after we've got upset, whatever it is. But but you can encourage them to try and think about what they can do. But you can only do that once they feel really connected to you and they're not stuck in shame. So this part can feel really, really hard to do if you have a child who is stuck in this kind of chronic shame cycle. And if you're saying to them, that was really, really hard, and they're going, it wasn't my fault, it was them, that is a sign that they are stuck in shame. If they're sort of denying it, flatly denying it, I would probably just go all in with the empathy and just keep going and keep going and keep going. And hopefully they will get to tears at some point. Now, they might not, and you might need to do a lot more work on that. And I would say if they're not getting to tears, it might be a time to try and seek some external support to help them to get to a place where they can start to dissolve some of that shame, because it's going to take a lot more. I mean, if you've seen my leaders framework, that stuff is really helpful. You want to try and get in laughter every day to try and sort of siphon off the top layer of stuff, and just go all in with empathy at all times. Just try and really, really help them feel and believe that they are good enough, they're doing the best they can, that kids do well if they can, that they are having a hard time, but they're not broken and you love them no matter what, and all of this stuff. They just need to keep hearing it, and they need to really believe that you believe that stuff that you're saying, so that they can start to have a more self-compassionate relationship with themselves and let that shame come up. And they're going to need to cry a lot, probably every day for a while. And if they're older, probably quite a long while, but they need to get that stuff out. So if you're in a place where you can do this work, then you want to look at problem solving with them. So I wonder what we could do next time that happens. And that might be, maybe we plan to not go to the dance show next time because it's too hard to watch when you're not involved. Or maybe it's you bring your own medal. You bring a medal that you can give your sister, and we make it about giving rather than receiving. Or bring something to do so that you're not so invested in the dance show and you don't feel like you're missing out. And having conversations ahead of time and sort of reminding, when you think about that might happen, sort of reminding them about the plan that you've come up with. And you can ask them, like, how can I help you if you do get really upset? What would you like me to do? How can I support you to get out of that situation? And then also really highlighting the positives. So anything they've done right. Did they try and hold off having the meltdown for a little while? Was there anything you spotted? Or when they were calming down, like, was there anything that they did that was not bad? I mean, we don't even necessarily need to be looking at anything really, really positive, but it's just highlighting anything that was slightly more positive, if that makes sense. I'm very conscious of time, and I've got a meeting in a minute, so I'm going to just flip through these last few slides. Taking care of you. So none of this is possible when you're dysregulated, and especially I think most of us in the room are ADHD, so it's even harder for us. So we need to kind of fill our cups, charge our batteries, however you want to look at it. So some of the things that really, really help are mindfulness, journaling, having self-compassion, which is a practice that you have to just practice, doing things that you love, meeting your physical needs, so hunger, thirst, exercise. We need to move as ADHDers, we really do. We need sleep. There's a study that I think came out very recently. I saw it all over the press yesterday about like the link between insomnia and ADHD, and how getting sleep right for ADHD is such a huge part of supporting ADHD. So, are you getting enough sleep? Is there anything you can do to support you to get more sleep? And then little nervous system reset. So checking in with your nervous system and seeing how you're feeling, and trying to do some stuff to calm your nervous system. So maybe some like long, slow exhales, maybe there's a workshop that's in the portal that sort of gives you some nervous system hacks to calm your nervous system, because we don't go from 0 to 100, we go from like 80 to 100. It's just that we're probably stuck in 80 because we've got hypervigilant nervous systems and we live in neurodivergent households, so often we're kind of up here already. So that's why it feels like everything happens so quick. And in the moment, you can use things like mantras. So, one of my favorites is kids do well if they can, Dr. Ross Green. I use that all the time. I've got it on my business cards. I just think it's so true. Also, it's not an emergency, kind of reminding our amygdala, like, this thing isn't an emergency. It's inconvenient. It's making a mess. It's breaking something. But no one's going to die. It's not an emergency. I can take a moment. And then trying to calm yourself down. So rooting yourself, taking some deep breaths, nurturing yourself. What do I need right now? Do I need a drink? Do I need to splash some water on my face? Do I need to get outside? And then thinking about space. So how can do I need to give myself some more space? Do I need to give my child some more space? Do we need to change the physical environment that we're in to give us a different context? I mean, when my child's having a meltdown, one of the best things I can do for her is literally take her outside. And that, you know, if she's in a too much of a big place, like, she'll just run outside herself. But sometimes she'll let me pick her up kicking and screaming, and we go outside, and immediately I just feel her soften, because I'm taking her away from the place where it happened, the people who it happened with, especially if it's dark outside, you know, it's quiet, we can hear the birds, and then you can do things like, you know, say 5 things that you can see, say 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can touch, 2 things that you can smell, 1 thing that you can taste. Or maybe it's the other way, 2 things that you could taste, 1 thing that you could smell. And that is a really nice way of slowly calming us down. But again, if you're doing that with your child, practice when they're not dysregulated. They probably won't want to do it the first time. So these are things that we practice again and again and again, and then we lean on in those moments. So I'm not going to have time to do this now, because I'm meant to be on a call with the MSPCC 2 minutes ago. But if you could, I'd love it if you could go into the Facebook group and just pop in what has stuck with you most from today, and what one thing are you going to commit to changing, and thinking about how you're going to make it happen. So not just, okay, I'm going to try and, you know, fill my cup, but like, okay, well, what thing are you going to do? Are you going to try a guided meditation, or are you going to try and shift the space when your child's in a meltdown? Then go into the next step of, how am I going to make it happen? What am I going to do to make sure that I actually do this thing? And I will pop that question in the Facebook group to remind you. And I think I'm there. Am I there? Yeah, cool. So thank you very much for coming, guys. And I'm sorry it wasn't in the calendar, as I promised. But do jump into the group and share it, and I will be downloading this and putting it in the portal, hopefully by the end of today. So hopefully other people will be able to access it tomorrow. So lovely to see you. Thank you for engaging, and I will see you all soon. And any questions, because I didn't really have time for Q&A, pop them in the Facebook group, and I'll either jump in and do a live answering all of them, or I'll just write some answers. Take care, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.